Hey guys, Tony Rowe in the house. Ooh, an LM showdown. LM Killerkaz versus LM Tony Rowe. I'll play knight f6. And I will play d5. If he exchanges, I'll probably play the Semi-Tarrasch. Yeah, let's try this. I'm not a huge fan of playing e takes d5, bishop g5, all that exchange queen's gambit decline nonsense. That's been known to be, I don't know if better for white in the theoretical sense, but practically irritating for what feels like, yeah, even longer than I've been playing chess, so I'm not going to do that. Yeah, this sounds great. Way to record when you're sick, idiot. My opponent thinking a long time over basically just e4. Wow, that's deep. Uh-huh. Queen b3, huh? What do I do? c5 is worth considering, even though I'd basically have to accept an isolated pawn. c5, knight takes d5, e takes d5, knight f3, knight c6. And then what does he do? If d takes c5, bishop takes c5. I have a feeling that black is active enough there to compensate for the Isolani. I don't even like isolated pawns, but I wouldn't be upset with that one. Black would have a lead in development there for sure, and I think the queen on b3 is probably not optimally placed in that line. And if c5, knight takes d5, e takes d5, knight f3, knight c6, you can also go e3 and just protect the pawn that way. The problem is that blocks in the dark squared bishop. That would be awfully passive. Another move I'm thinking about is just going knight takes and b takes c3 and then c5. Just playing that way. Also worth considering. That's more in the spirit of the opening, I think. Yeah, let's try that. And don't think it much matters. Even if he goes bishop a3 here, I think I'll still go knight c6. If he takes here, or takes this way, I'm not all that worried about the pawn loss at the moment. I mean, I think I can just almost gain it back immediately with. Queen a5 doesn't work because he has bishop b4, but maybe queen c7 or something like that. He'd have to work pretty hard to keep it, and I don't think it would be very good. So I spent too long trying to think about which move I should have played on move 5, I think, but it was, you know, a good thought exercise thinking about the differences between knight takes c3 and c5 right away. You could argue that this was already a critical moment in the game because I'm deciding between essentially two different pawn structures and two entirely different piece setups. So already I kind of had a big decision to make. Queen b3. I doubt this is theoretically all that good, but it did use up 2.5 minutes of my time, so I'm not saying this is bad, it's just certainly not the most obvious or likely most testing move. e4, of course, would be critical. And after e4, knight takes c3, b takes c3, c5, knight f3, c takes d4, c takes d4, bishop b4 check, bishop d2, bishop takes d2 check, Queen takes d2, castles. White has a variety of moves. We could look at that after the game. He goes knight f3. Yeah, I'll go knight c6. I want to see if I can force e3 before he can get this thing out and before he really has a chance to go e4 anyway. I mean, it's entirely possible that he could go something like e4 here regardless. And after c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4 here. He's got like bishop b5 check. Pretty much pot committed to go bishop d7. Okay, so he goes e3. I think I'm just going to go bishop e7. Yeah, we'll try this. One thing about this pawn structure that's worth remembering, I think, is usually black should be at least a little bit reluctant to... I guess with the pawn on e3, it's a little bit different, but usually I'm a little bit reluctant to release attention with c takes d4, c takes d4. This bishop is not a great piece right now, and it's kind of a problem piece for white. And if he wants to put it on the b2 square, the bishop on b2 is quite a bit better if you exchange off one time. Then white is sort of one d5 push away from having like a monster bishop on the long diagonal, whereas if he just wants to put it on b2 now, and I never really take here, it's again still pretty bad. So maybe this bishop's final resting place is on a3. I would like to go b6 and bishop b7. That would be the most harmonious setup for black. This obviously looks quite a bit like a Grünfeld now. Those of you paying close attention. My bishop is not on the g7 square, but I haven't had to spend an extra move going g6 to go bishop g7, so I'm a little bit speedier in development, and also white's pawn is on e3 instead of e4, and the queen is on b3 instead of d1. Pretty happy about bishop e2. I was a little bit more worried about bishop b5 because it makes it kind of hard to go b6. Maybe I had knight a5 there and then b6 would be a simple reaction. Okay. Yeah, I'm not gonna think too long. I'm just gonna go b6. I was gonna say catch up on time, but I'm actually ahead on time somehow now. I am trying to work a little bit on my time management. It's not easy. I think, you know, for better or for worse, I have sort of a thoughtful or, you know, analytical style. I'm kind of a little bit the scientific type, and that can lead to overanalysis and the like. So, okay, so he's obviously wanting to open up the d file. I'm just going to clear off my queen to a very natural square. This also has the bonus that after bishop b7, there's no real funny stuff with the queen x-raying my bishop here. Like if he goes bishop a3, I go bishop a7, he takes here, takes here, takes here, takes here. I'm not losing the bishop. Hope everyone had a good weekend. I had a really uneventful weekend. The weather here has been unbelievably suck. It was super cold over the weekend, like, you know, 15 degrees and snowy and windy. And today it warmed up, but it's been raining all day, and now all the snow is slush, which sucks. When you have a dog, I think slush is actually the worst. Because rain is like, if it rains, and the rain, see, I'm even thinking scientifically about like what the worst, maybe analytically is a better word, about what the worst weather is for dog walking. And I think I decided that like if it rains, that kind of just coats the ground. And so like just the pads of your dog's feet and maybe like the hair closest to the, you know, ground gets like soaked, and that's like pretty easy to wipe off. But if it like you know, if it snows, that's not as bad as rain, I think. That usually Morty's feet are less wet that way. But if it snows and then it starts to like get warm and melt, it's like your dog can step in like 6 inches of slush and then all 6 inches of his feet are completely soaked in water. So you get like the worst of the snow and the rain combined. So on that note, where should my pieces go? Okay. You know, one idea here is to not go bishop b7 right away. The reason I say that is because if I go bishop b7 and he goes d5, and let's say I play something like knight a5, eventually I'm probably going to have to take on d5. And if I do that, my bishop is actually not all that well placed on this diagonal. I'd rather be able to go to like f5 or g4. Thinking about the move e5, actually. With the idea that e5, d5, knight a5, let's say queen c2, and then I can go something like knight b7 and go to this really nice blockading square with my knight on d6, and then I can play for f5, like g6, f5, or... And again, my bishop would be better on c8 there than staring down this pawn chain on b7. This would be kind of a Grünfeld-esque style move. And if he doesn't really do anything, like let's say he plays bishop e3, I can even consider going bishop e6. And on d5, which appears to fork my stuff, I can go knight a5, queen c2, and then let's say bishop g4. Could also consider rook d8. e5, bishop b5, though. No, e5, bishop b5, c takes. C takes. I guess if he allows me to take a bunch of times. Oh, I have bishop f6 at the end of that. So he almost has to take on c6 first. So like e5, bishop b5, c takes d4, bishop takes c6, queen takes c6, c takes d5, e takes d5, knight takes d4. e4 is hanging there. He has bishop f3 though. Yeah. I have a feeling that should be okay for me, even though he's gaining a tempo on my queen. Seems weird, but maybe I can do this. Let's try it. It was one of my first instincts. It's a pretty thematic idea in the Grünfeld. This isn't a Grünfeld, but of course structurally it's quite similar. I don't think taking is particularly great. By the way, shout out to Veselin Topalov. I don't know if, for whatever reason, at least right now, the news that he withdrew completely from the Grand Prix circuit, the European Championships, FIDE World Championships, cycles, everything. He's completely withdrawn because of poor organization, lack of sponsors, corruption in FIDE. He wrote something on his website about it. put out kind of a press release, but for whatever reason, Chessbase and Chess24, all the major news sites, haven't picked it up yet. So if you're hearing it for the first time, the Tony Rowe exclusive, yeah, I mean, I think it's awesome. I mean, for a long time, FIDE has been, I think unsatisfactory in a lot of ways. And, the problem is they sort of have professional players, a polite term would be like, I don't even know what a polite term would be. Their fate, the fate of professional chess players kind of rests in the hands of FIDE to organize events that have prize money and, all that. And so it's a lot of players wouldn't have done what he did, but it's good that he did, because someone needs to do it. I'm a little bit nervous about trouble down the C file if I just take a gajillion times. Maybe I shouldn't be, but... So if C takes d4, C takes d4, E takes d4, Knight takes d4, Knight takes d4, let's say Bishop takes d4, these moves look mostly forced. I do have Bishop e6 with tempo there. Maybe just like Rook f to d8. Yeah, the problem is he goes queen b2. So C takes d4, C takes d4, E takes d4, Knight takes d4, Knight takes d4, Bishop takes d4, Bishop e6, Queen b2, and he hits the b7 or g7 pawn rather. And I don't have any amazing responses to that, unfortunately. I can go Bishop e6 right now, and if d5, Knight a5. Yeah, I'm going to try that. Queen b2 then, I don't even, again, have to, I think, take on d4 yet. I can go something like Knight a5 and maybe try and play Bishop c4 or Knight c4. Get into this weak c4 square. I'm essentially, I'm doing my best to coax him into playing d5. I don't even know if him playing d5 is good for me, but, something like d5, Knight a5, Queen c2, I don't know, even Bishop d7, just like simple stuff. Knight b7 to d6. I don't know. It's interesting. By the way, is this going up on your YouTube channel? Yes, it will be. So take your time, Killerkaz. Use all 6 minutes and 40 seconds, because I'm not at all sure about the theoretical, value inherent in my position. Stupid Semi-Tarrasch. I should really just start playing the Nimzo Indian, but I'm lazy. You know, I could go... Of course, this invites a French, but... I could go bishop b4 here, like every sensible human being on the planet. But, you know, when you go bishop b4 here, it really introduces a crap load of extra work, whereas if I just go d5, the only moves that don't transpose back to a QGD, which I'm already prepped for, would be bishop g5, which can be met by d takes c4, I think, with relatively little work, and c takes d5, you know, when I have to decide whether or not to go e takes d5 or knight takes d5. But so, you know, the work required to study bishop g5, d takes c4, for instance, or c takes, knight takes, or c takes, e takes is quite a bit less than going bishop b4 here, even though bishop b4 is probably theoretically, you know, quite a nice move. So I have to go knight a5 here. I don't think d takes e6. Knight b3 is a very good sacrifice, so I assume he's going to play queen a4, queen c2, queen b2. I doubt queen b5 is much of anything, of course. After queen a4, bishop d7, he probably will go bishop b5, and I'm not really sure I want to trade off my light squared bishop for his. This thing has relatively limited potential, especially if he wants to go c4 at some point. Whereas I think yeah, but what else do? I don't know. Queen a4, bishop g4 would be the only other real option. I don't think going back to c8 is very good. And if he goes, let's just even say h3. h3 is probably maybe even not the best move, but if he goes h3 and I'm forced to, like, essentially take here, I'm not sure if that's particularly great for me either. Well, I got to move my bishop, so let's put it on d7. I'm not losing to anything, am I? d6 or something. Ooh, d6 though. Ooh. So if I go bishop d7, he goes d6, and I'm forced to take with the bishop, and then he has queen d2, hitting the bishop, and of course if I move it, he hits this bishop. So is bishop g4 forced then? Bishop c8, Jesus. Okay, I'm not playing bishop c8. that's not happening. Oh, I had knight b7. You dumbass. That's okay. Bishop g4 is not terrible. So let's say he goes h3 now, and I go bishop d7. I try and claim that h3 is weakness. So if bishop d7, h3, bishop d7, d6, bishop takes d6, queen d2, knight b7. Yeah, you dirty rascal. Maybe he has bishop a6 there, though, threatening to remove the defender, and I can't really... I'm still pinned up. Ugh. I'm pretty reluctant to go bishop h5 and back to g6. I do not think my bishop belongs there. That's a sorry piece. Alright, I mean... Do I want to go c... Oh my god, I didn't mean to do that. Oh no. Okay, I mean, it's not bad. It might be the best move, but I meant to make an arrow. Oh, god. That was bound to happen eventually. It might as well have been this game. God damn. Well, I think it's actually a pretty decent move. I was thinking about this, like, last move, actually, before I forgot that I had to retreat my bishop. I was thinking about going c4 in this position. The point is that he does not get to go c4, and c5 is a really good square for both of my remaining minor pieces. Like, I'm heavily incentivized to trade off dark squared bishops in this position, you know, with with the pawn on e5 especially, my dark squared bishop is not very good, and his dark squared bishop is, you know, at least sort of in like the textbook sense, his good bishop, because his bishop on f3 is so bad. And of course my knight can possibly come to the c5 square and then to the d3 square perhaps. So go like rook f to d8 or rook a to d8 also. I'm a little bit worried about bishop c5 d6, so I'm probably not going to do that. Rook a to d8 is interesting. I don't think my rook has a lot of active prospects on the B or the A or even the C file. It's kind of an odd move though. I'm of course leaving this rook on f8 because I'm hoping that at some point I'll be able to go like g6 f5 or something. I could also just go knight back, but yeah, maybe I should. Okay, that's less committal. I'll play knight back to b7. I don't necessarily know where this thing is going yet, but as long as I'm not worried about the weakness on c4, then I think putting my knight back on b7 is better. I'm sure my knight is coming back to b7, basically, if I don't need to protect c4, so I'm just not sure if it's going to d6 or c5 yet. I really want to play bishop c5 and knight to d6. But, you know, the knight on d6 protects the pawn on c4, it attacks the pawn on e4, and it blockades the d pawn perfectly, and it also prepares f5. So c4 is, I think, optically maybe the more active square in that it's, you know, one square forward, and d3 is weak, but maybe after his bishop inevitably goes back to e2, the c5 square is kind of bad, because once the bishop's on e2, it blocks the queen from protecting the c4 square, and d3 is not really a weakness anymore. So probably d6 is the better square long term. By the way, speaking of things that were bound to happen but had not happened yet, so I don't know if you guys know this. I've been mentioning my dog Morty on my last maybe 3 or 4 videos. I have a dog. He's a golden doodle. He's 1 year old. He's pretty adorbs. But he's legally a service dog, and so I can take him, you know, according to the ADA, I can take him really anywhere a person would be allowed to go in public, which is neat. And so on my way home from work, I stopped at the grocery store. Maybe I should go rook a to d8 first. I'm going to do that. I stopped at the grocery store on my way home from work. And Morty pooed in the middle of the grocery store. Which I think if you have a service dog, like, it's just bound to happen. Like, your dog's going to get sick and he's going to be off his normal, like, schedule or whatever. Or, you know, he's just going to have that urge one day and he's going to dump on the floor somewhere. And it happened at my local grocery store, a Giant Eagle. If for whatever reason there's anyone, you know, watching from the Westlake Giant Eagle who shops there or who works there, I apologize. I would had 5 seconds of just absolute stunned horror. And then, okay, so he preempts bishop c5 by attacking the pawn. So what do? I don't think f5 is very good yet. I can go b5, but that seems extremely bad after just like a4. I think I'm pretty happy not giving him any hooks for the moment. This feels kind of dumb, but I can go rook to c8 with the idea of going bishop c5, queen takes c4, bishop takes e3, queen takes c7, bishop takes f2 check, king takes f2, rook takes c7. And I win the pawn back, and he's got a weak c-pawn, hopefully. That's an idea. I could also just be satisfied not trading the dark squared bishops and go knight d6. And ask him what he's doing. The problem is he is doing something. He's going to go bishop g2 and f4 is his plan. That's Killerkaz's plan. Not a bad plan. In fact, it might be a good plan. I don't have as much of a plan, I think. My plan was trading dark squared bishops. That's about as far as I got. Yeah, I'm just gonna play rook d to c8 and ask him what he's doing. I would presume he's going bishop g2, and then I have to think about bishop c5 a little bit. Yeah, and actually, I know this is a real cheeseball joke, but this really did happen. As I was sprinting towards like the registers to try and go get some plastic bags and like some cleaning supplies and stuff, the only thing I could think was how ironic it was that my dog's name is Morty, and I was absolutely mortified at his behavior. It's pretty funny, right? Yeah, bishop g4 was good. I totally missed that. That's just lazy calculation. I was so focused on you know, canine bowel movements that that I missed it. Should I put my rook on e8? Rook c to e8, sort of maybe try and dissuade f4 in some lame way. Maybe. Okay, I'm just going to try it. Neither of us have a lot of time. Both of these elite Lichess Masters have displayed impeccable time management by making it to move 21 with less than a minute left. Using 15 full minutes probably to make it to move 21. Shout out to Killerkaz, a man after my own heart. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I don't really know how I make progress here unless I go... I could go knight d6 and keep playing, but I think white with the two bishops and the plan of bishop g2, f4, for instance, has better long-term prospects. This is kind of a lame game to upload to my channel if I take a perpetual here, but I don't want to end up being worse either. I'm going to pull a Geary here and take the draw. Oh, man. All right, so let's toss this into a study. The study. Okay. Let's take a look. Okay, so let's at least temporarily turn on the opening explorer so we can check this out. Queen b3, how rare is queen b3? Novelty. Fifth move novelty from Killerkaz. Oh, every goddamn video I do this. I go novelty and then there's no novelty end symbol. The only reason I go here, you might be thinking like, why the hell does he keep looking for the N when he knows the N isn't there? The N used to be here, and Tebow took it out. Not saying he's wrong, it just disappeared. And when I was helping him develop the study feature, it was in here. It was in like, you know, the beta testing version. So, okay. So I played knight takes c3, b takes c3, c5, which is sort of like the I would say thematic Semi-Tarrasch way to go. But I did think about c5 here, which I think is an interesting idea. And the point is now that something like knight takes d5 E takes d5, knight f3. I didn't think about c4 at all. I'm not sure that can be really amazing. Maybe. I thought about knight c6. The point being is that if white is forced to release the tension on the c5 square this early, it's usually not to his advantage, because my bishop hasn't had to move yet. If we go back to something like, let's say, here and knight f3 and here, this would be a very classical variation of the Tarrasch defense, and black doesn't really have any great moves here besides bishop e7, and only after this is white, for instance, taking on c5, because black has played bishop e7 and then bishop takes c5, which loses a move. But in the game, white would find it hard to do the same in this position, because e3 is so unfavorable. You don't want to protect your d-pawn with e3 and block in this bishop, and yeah. Okay, I can even go c4 here if I want, but once white has made this concession to block in the bishop, then I can even think about just going bishop e7 and takes, and I'm sure after something like bishop e2, castles, yeah, probably not bishop e6 right away because of queen b7, but just, yeah, maybe even bishop b6. Bishop e6, I'm sure black has more than enough counterplay for the isolated d-pawn. This is probably a reasonable version for black compared to the main lines of the Tarrasch, because the pawn on e3 and the bishop on c1/d2, wherever it goes, is not particularly optimal, nor do I think the queen on b3 is particularly great when black hasn't declared his light squared bishop yet. If he can go to e6 and threaten d4, for instance, the queen on b3 is probably a little bit misplaced, so I'll mark c4 is interesting. But yeah, that was an idea. But I don't like isolated d-pawns almost no matter what. I'm a big My System fan, and I'm a big Bent Larsen fan, who was sort of at least he was billed to have been, noticeably influenced by My System, because Nimzovich was a transplant to Denmark, where Larsen was from. So I think, a lot of Danish players had that sort of Nimzo influence, and Larsen has said many times he doesn't like accepting the isolated d-pawn. He prefers to play against the d-pawn, and, Nimzo, I think, he had the whole, criminal lock and key, etc. thing, so I think that sort of rubbed off on me, and I almost always would avoid the isolated d-pawn, even if it's to my detriment, for instance, in this game. So I went the normal route, and I think one redeeming feature of this route is it seems risky for white to go e4 here and try and sack the pawn, but maybe. I wonder if he can do it. I would assume I would have to try and go for it. I did think about this. Oh yeah, this is much better. Okay, so this would be. I didn't think much farther than this that this was possible, but of course here now d4 hangs, and there's nothing really here, so yeah, he would have to let this go and play something else, but that's probably not great. So we both continued with pretty obvious moves. I was a little bit more nervous about bishop b5, maybe unjustifiably. I wasn't super excited about allowing this and taking on these, even though I can get rid of one at any time. Two bishops are nice, but I was less certain that this was better for black, I guess, as Stockfish is. But maybe. I was thinking I would either have to play queen c7 or maybe knight a5. Oh, I can't play knight a5, dumbass. That's what pins are. Yeah, I thought about queen c7 and then just castles with b6, etc. on the cards. I think would be the way I would have gone. But this was something I was looking at. But bishop e2 is not bad. Maybe even objectively, I think maybe I over-evaluated bishop b5, and Killerkaz's bishop e2 is just as good. Sometimes it's better to just put your bishop on, the safer square for the time being. Castles, b6, pretty obvious. I have to get this guy to to a good square and also deal with this weak b7 pawn. So this guy has to go to a square that doesn't suck, and b6 is pretty much the only way you can do that. Rook d1, queen c7, pretty much the only move. e4, I didn't actually consider this, but it makes a lot of sense. d4 is protected enough now, and white might as well, and try and find a better home for this guy. And I decided to go with e5. I'm trying to think if I could remember, a Grünfeld line off the top of my head where this was a thematic idea, so we can kind of compare positions. One, I think maybe... Jeez. Let's see if I can remember. I might not be able to, so if I waste like 2 minutes and then I delete whatever I'm doing right now, don't judge me. So let's say knight f3, c5, rook b1, castles, bishop e2, and like b6. And castles, queen c7. Let's say I've looked at this in the past. And I know in some of these positions black was going d5. Let's say bishop g5, knight c6, bishop h4, and then bishop g3. I think people were, going e5 in this position. And this is, not exactly the same, of course, but it is... Let me put in some interesting marks here where I deem them appropriate. This was a line that was covered in the safest Grünfeld, I think. This idea of playing b6, castles, and then delaying the development of your light squared bishop. Similar to what I did in the game, actually. Playing, a flexible move first and deciding whether or not this bishop should go to b7 or e6 or g4 as the opportunity comes. The same with this knight, actually, in this case, because in some lines in the Grünfeld, it's correct for this knight to go to the d7 square, but in this specific instance where bishop g5 does not cover the d4 square, black goes knight c6 to try and exploit this, but this is sort of beside the point. But, you can see that this position is relatively similar to the one that we got in the game, of course. The bishop is not on g7. Actually, I think that's to black's benefit in this case, because you can see there was always this threat of pulling my bishop to, better squares like d6 or c5, for instance. But my bishop ended up on g4, same knight constellation. His bishop was over here, of course, and his queen was, hanging out on these squares. But, all things considered, a pretty sort of similar construction. And this is like one of the weird things about studying different openings for both sides is that, I've studied a ton of openings, and I have friends who call me like book monkey and, make fun of me and tell me I'm wasting my time or whatever, but it does come in handy because structures in chess pop up in different places, and ideas are transferable between different types of middle games, and it's like these kinds of examples that I think are really instructive, where I can go like, hey, I've seen this sort of idea in the Grünfeld, where you play this e5 c5 structure and you try and get white to blockade, push d5, and then you try and blockade with knight a5, b7, d6, or whatever. So. Yeah, there are other moves here. I guess it is worth considering bishop g4, isn't it? I guess my question would be, what if he doesn't go d5? Of course, going bishop e6 is incorrect if I can force him to go d5 another way. Because if I go bishop e6 and like I did in the game, he goes d5, knight a5, queen c2, and I have to move this bishop again, I could have this exact same position with me to move with my bishop on g4, let's say, if for whatever reason I could force him to go d5 regardless, right? So here is probably a critical moment where I should have thought a little bit harder, but I think I was talking Morty or talking something at this point, and I just thought bishop e6 is the way to go, but it might not be the best. I was a little bit worried about something like this here, and then a square that protects c5, when I wasn't super excited about playing something to the tune of this, where my knight on a5 is not as relevant now, and I guess we both have these weak c-pawns, but yeah, something about this feels not great for me, and I didn't like the way it looked. I guess I should take this way, but even still, it felt uncomfortable to me, so I didn't like the way that this looked. And I'm going to comment that I think white is at least somewhat better here, and I wouldn't really want to play this way in a game. Knight a5, however, is maybe a possibly better way to reach the same position. I would imagine if he goes queen b5, I can play bishop d7 and at least gain a move, right? Like, why put my bishop on d7 first? That doesn't make any damn sense. So what if he just goes queen c2? Okay, then I have a pin, so he can't do that. What if he goes queen b2 right away? Yeah, but if I go bishop b7, he can go d5. Ah, and then I have time for c5 maybe? Yeah, this is possible. This is true. Let's delete that crap. Let's delete that crap. I like to keep tidy studies, you know? Knight a5 might be the best way to sort of delay. And again, if he goes here... Yeah, I don't love bishop b7, though. The problem is you mess up both your minor pieces at the same time when he goes d5. This bishop now sucks. And I also can't go knight back to b7 right away. So what if I just go bishop g4 here? Oh, I'm losing because I played knight a5. Right. Tactics. Calculation. We'll get there. Yeah, see, that's the problem with knight a5. Bishop b7, d5. Okay, and then... I probably should go c4. Yeah, it's true. So bishop b7 is actually probably quite good because... It does bungle up my minor pieces, but it forces him to play d5, and maybe this is a better way to go. By the way, these structures, it's important that the pawn is on e5 when you go c4. Sometimes Grünfeld players like to play this idea after d5 of going c4 without the pawn on e5, and the problem is you forfeit the d4 square that way, and all of a sudden all of these pieces start flooding into the center and the king side. The whole idea of this structure with e5, c5 is that you can go c4. I mean, of course, there are other ideas, right? It's just a usual chess structure where you can put the knight on d6 and play for f5. But when the pawn is on e5, you do have the additional idea of pushing the pawn to c4 because the d4 square is covered. And c5 is a really good launching pad for a lot of your pieces. So, yeah, maybe this was a better way to go. I mean, you can see, for instance, that, let's even say, like in the game, maybe it was worth him going c4 immediately here and stopping me from going c4. Now I can't do it, and this bishop is quite bad, and of course I can still go knight to d6, but him having the pawn on c4 instead of me is quite a benefit for him. And usually... in this structure, black has to go for f5 if he wants to try and make progress, and white would go for a4, a5, for instance, is an idea. So let's just make that a different color. So, ooh, you know which color I want. There we go. I was a little bit worried, though, about... Stockfish wants me to go here, but I was worried about this. Takes queen d2, knight b7, bishop a6. Ah, I have this cheapo. This in-between flick. That I didn't see. And if he takes here, I have to take here. If he takes here, I take on f3, presumably. Yeah. He goes here, Takes. Yeah, I mean, I think most people would take white. I think I'd rather have the two pieces. I mean, the rooks are good here. They can come to the central files and all that. Like, I have active squares for the rooks, but I think most people would take the pieces. In any case, I didn't see bishop a4 regardless. I probably shouldn't say in any case and regardless in the same sentence, but yeah, and then I get in c4. And I think at this point it felt like, at least to me, that I was mostly out of the weeds here. Once bishop c5 threat is on the cards, it becomes hard for white to really cause me a huge number of problems. a4 was interesting, and as I mentioned before, that's a plan with trying to go a5, a takes, and saddle me with a backward pawn on the b file. Of course, I can continue with my idea. I'd probably take with the queen. That way the knight can still come to the d6 square, and my queen is pretty active here. Also, maybe halts. Now a5 can even be met by b5, perhaps, but I think black is mostly okay in these positions now. Yeah, why didn't I go bishop c5 here? Oh, I was a little bit worried that he could maybe play this, but I guess I didn't really think even one ply further ahead. I mean, something like this would be better for black. Yeah, I mean, there's probably, I hate when I do that. There's nothing here for white. So that's a definite improvement. Bishop c5. Rook a to d8 was a little lackadaisical, I think. And queen to e2 exploits that nicely. Now I can't go bishop c5. Well, I thought I couldn't go bishop c5. If he takes, really? Okay, I mean, just sack it. That makes some sense. Like, this position is probably, even though there's bishop g4, rook c7, d6 there. So go here first. I mean, black does have positional compensation here. This knight is obviously a monster. This thing is kind of suck. And c4 is c3 rather is always going to be loose. Black is going to find a way to put this rook on the c file, for instance. I mean, rook c7. And black has good compensation. But, you know, I didn't see a reason to sack a pawn, and, you know, why do this? It's not like black is going to win this position. This is like one of these examples where a computer thinks like you can do this and it's equal, but why would a human do this? I mean, why sack the pawn if I don't have to? It's just like one of those things where practically I'm probably not going to win this. Why take the risk of him, you know, finding some way to activate his extra pawn or consolidate or something? And of course here it's, if I can't keep a rook on the c file to play bishop c5 and I don't want to sack the pawn, it's not that easy to make progress. I could consider something like knight d6 here, for instance. The problem is that the moment your knight kind of strays too far away from b7, this a4 plan becomes irritating. On b7, of course, the knight stops the pawn, but once you move the knight, you put it on d6, a4, a5 unlocks, and yeah, it just becomes irritating. And sort of the catch-22 of these positions is that black doesn't have the two bishops, and so even though you have this nice knight and you have this pawn structure very much set up to go f5, you're sort of reluctant to open up the position for his two bishops at any case, so as black you sort of end up just sitting around. Like, it's pretty risky to open up the position, and that's why I kind of took the draw here, is that I think long-term it's a little bit more practically difficult to play black's position. There's always the threat of the game opening up and the two bishops, and long-term white can slowly organize a4, a5, and maybe bishop g2, f4, and it just, I wasn't sure that I had a plan beyond f5, which is sort of risky. So I was happy to take the draw here. Maybe white is slightly better in these positions, but it's also practically difficult to play white. If in a way, white is sort of always has to be on the lookout for this bishop c5 idea, and the knight on d6 is an imposing piece. It looks quite good aesthetically, so and white's advantage is minimal, if any. So if black just holds tight, then I'm not sure white has a ton. So I hope you guys enjoy the game. I hope you enjoyed my grocery store misfortunes, and I will be back with more. Peace.